This is BizPulse, only on Africa News Network, first, fast, alive. Good evening to you. My name is Cindy Mabi. South Africa is making the most of the World Economic Forum platform. The delegation from the country has reached out to international partners to position the country as an attractive investment destination and trade partner. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa has met with various African leaders and the founder of World Economic Forum, Professor Klaus Schwab. The International Monetary Fund Chief Christine Lagarde met with Ramaphosa and agreed that structural challenges were a burden to economic growth in South Africa. She stated that bold and timely reforms are needed in the country to create an environment that is favorable to job creation and less inequality. Ramaphosa is scheduled to attend and engage in a breakfast session titled Building Peace in Africa today.
The reception that we got from potential investors and current investors was very positive. Everybody is feeling very positive about our country now, and the re-rating of our currency, with the rand having broken through the 12 rand mark to the dollar, also infuses a lot of confidence in many people, and they see that as a great boost for the economy of our country. We're talking more about how we are reforming ourselves, dealing with the issues they've raised. Corruption was one of the key issues they raised, and we addressed that and told them that we're dealing with corruption. We also informed them that we are managing the transition process, where President Zuma is the president of the country and I'm president of the African National Congress. That is being managed, and is being managed well. And we also dealt with how we are going to promote further investments into the country. They're dealing with uncertainty at a political level as well as at the regulatory level. So we've just had a wonderful session on South Africa, which was called South Africa Strategy, and it dealt with a number of issues that our country is facing right now. In the audience were cabinet ministers, but we also had a number of investors from all over the world, some who have invested in the country and some who are thinking of investing in the country. And what they wanted to know is, where is South Africa going right now? And we informed them that South Africa is open for business. We are now on a path of renewal. We're on a path of uniting our people, uniting business, government, labor and communities.
Is Oliver Dixon, social-political analyst, and we have Zamo Madlala from the Radical Economic Transformation Coalition. You're at home. Thanks for joining us. Gentlemen, good evening to you. Is this exactly what we need in the interim, to allay any fears or of policy uncertainty, or that we're in a rudderless leadership situation? And this is the tone from Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa that will ease all of those concerns. Zamo.
Well, good evening, Cindy, and good evening to the viewers at home. My personal opinion is that no, it's not. I mean, yes, the statement that came out, there's a bit of a duplication. One says that the actual opinion that says that there's political uncertainty within South Africa actually predates the deputy president's election to the top job within the ANC. But then there's another report which clearly states that Ms. Lagarde said it in the course of this week that there's political uncertainty. So I thought, well, let's look at the dictionary. So that means unreliability, riskiness, or unpredictability. Now, if you think about it, the deputy president was campaigning on the New Deal, inclusive growth, etc., etc. And then by the end of the conference, he was the one that was talking radical economic transformation. So I think that's where the political uncertainty comes from. It's more the man that they were speaking to that they think he's mantashing around, and that he's no longer sticking to the word that they expected him to be sticking to. So they're thinking, well, reassure us what's going on. I mean, Tony Leon did come out with a tweet that he knew somebody who had given the deputy president 30 million, and he didn't think that person would be really happy to hear that the deputy president now was agreeing to land expropriation without any compensation. So I think the political uncertainty is not really on South Africa. It doesn't predate his election. It was more they want him to ensure that, listen, you are not going to do this craziness that apparently the ANC delegates have come up with, which is let's nationalize the Reserve Bank, let's take land without compensation, and all of the radical resolutions that came from that conference.
Yeah, so Davos, the World Economic Forum, you're saying, is going to neutralize or even subdue that aspiration of changing the economy to meaningfully transform the lives of the majority black poor, that we're likely to see a more toned down approach to radical economic transformation. And your view, Oliver?
My intuition says yes, but my intuition is outside of what's real information that we have. The information we have is one where investors are saying that structural reforms need to take place to stimulate growth, economic growth, job creation, and to stimulate FDI. Importantly, we need to ask ourselves, is that structural reform to the proposed structural changes, or is that structural reform to what's currently the structure of our economy? The current structure of our economy is one where job creation does not happen. It's also one where economic growth has been happening below 1.5% for the last 5 years. We were lucky in the last 2 quarters that we had economic growth above 2%. So much so that our revised economic growth projection set to about 2.5%. But that's quarters and not a number of years. So what is a structural reform that needs to happen? One, it needs to be one that opens up the economy for businesses, particularly black-owned businesses, to compete equally. That structural reform can only happen once you change certain laws about business regulation, once you change procurement laws when it comes to government business, and how you facilitate the business process between government and the private sector. And as it currently stands, it favors old white-collar, white monopoly-centered businesses. And that's the structure that needs to change. A lot of that came from the ANC conference that said, look, that needs to change, so we're going to change it through things like land expropriation without compensation, so that one, we can stimulate a black open market in the agrarian sector, one that we can give land to industrialists and one fund industrialists through the IDC and improve that funding pocket over there. So if that's the structural reform that investors are talking about, then they're agreeing with the ANC conference, and that's a good thing. But if they mean something different, because these words are very vague, right? They have no real meaning unless they explain it.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of land expropriation, we saw Deputy President talking about essentially unlocking the government land, what the state already has, and almost doing a land audit and then having a roadmap as how it's going to be commercially viable. It's not necessarily looking at your Johan Rupert's and Oppenheimer and those that are monopolizing the economy. So do you think this is essentially a prelude to maybe radical economic transformation spreading out over a couple of years, as opposed to things changing drastically overnight, so to speak?
Well, my real opinion, I mean, I was listening very attentively to Oliver, and when he was narrating what the investors might be thinking, I certainly think it's the other, not the one that you were explaining. My opinion is that it's really, it's not going to happen. Because firstly, you've been told that land expropriation is not going to happen, it shouldn't affect food security. Meaning each and every farm that is working should not be affected. And I actually support that, because I'm aware physically of farms that were taken either by government purchased, whether it was government that did not provide the support or whatever, but now those farms are lying fallow, they have not been used, the irrigation systems have rusted up, and those farms used to be commercially viable. So I certainly support the Deputy President in saying, can we actually take stock of what we've done? Let's look at the land that, since there was willing buyer, willing seller, there are farms that were purchased by government. Where are those farms now? What is actually happening? So that they can actually go and look at the model and say, yes, we have bought this land. Yes, we did not expropriate it, we bought it. Then what happened? Is it still productive? Is it still producing the way it used to previously? That definitely has to occur.
Yeah.
And
but that's looking inward and in terms of at a domestic or micro level. But what is the International Monetary Fund going to speak to Cyril Ramaphosa about when we have a national debt that's probably that has put, I think it's about 50,000 debt per capita on every single person in this country. And if that is not addressed, you understand that we're just perpetuating this dependency on the IMF.
You can't go to the IMFC and say, hey, can I have some money for a land project where I will be establishing an incubator that will fund black farmers and support black farmers. And then the IMFC asks you, but yeah, you got some land. How's that land doing? And when you do an internal audit, it performs poorly. Just like Zamo said, some of those farms and some of that land, irrigation systems dried up. If we look at what happened in the Free State, everybody was given 5 cows. Those cows died. Those things generate absolutely no money, right? It's really been a subsistence farming model and not a commercial farming model. So when you as a state fail with what you already have, you can't convince someone to borrow you money so you can do more.
Yeah, but are we in a position to even afford to borrow more money? And I understand that we need to have innovation and work around even putting in the necessary structures and processes so that those businesses are sustainable. And that is maybe a lack of thinking. There's a lack on our part to say, I've got a project that I can put a certain consortium or think tank together and help those farmers or emerging farmers, as opposed to just criticizing. We can talk about what's wrong for days as opposed to, how it can be fixed.
Our debt, our current budget deficit is at 50 billion, right? If you add free education, which is being rolled out this year, at 12.5 billion this year, you're looking at a budget deficit of 62.5 billion, right? That's our budget deficit. That's money we need to go borrow to do the things that the finance minister told us last year, February, which was Praveen Gordhan. So we need to go borrow 62.5 billion. But currently, our debt to GDP ratio is sitting close to 60%. That means every 1 rand in this country, 50% thereof is used not to repay debt, just to service it, right? And that's the reality about our ability to borrow money. But the IMF seems willing to borrow more money. One, because we have a rand which is suddenly performing well, whether that's because of political stability, so to speak, or whether that's because the dollar is actually performing poorly and not necessarily the rand that's strengthening, is a different conversation altogether, but it excites investors. What also excites investors is that the candidate they've been backing in the ANC, who is likely to win the elections come 2019, is now the head of the ANC, and he's speaking to them in Davos. And they are willing to put money behind the guy who they thought would be the one being able to reform the economy. So if your credit rating looks bad and your debt to GDP ratio looks bad and your deficit looks bad, those things don't really matter to people when it comes to their ability to invest money and enact structural reforms in favor of them with that money that they invest and borrow to your country. So all of those things put aside, the IMFC and investors of similar kind are willing to invest that sort of money if it's politically favorable for them. And that's where the money is going to have to go. It's going to have to go towards social welfare development. And that needs to begin with land. But the
obligations that comes with the debt, whether you are credit worthy, or in our case, junk status, or even the threat of being downgraded, etc., means that the cost thereof of borrowing is more expensive, even servicing that debt. You know? So
we're not,
that balloons in itself. So how then does it benefit us in the long run if you are still dependent on what the prescription is of your funders and how you need to run your business or your government?
The reality of it is that at some point we need to go back and say we probably have to restructure our debt. Yes, right now the short-term measure, the budget, I mean the financial year end is coming now in March, and it needs to be money. They're going to have to go and try and find it. And I mean the biggest looming deadline right now is Eskom, which is next week. They need to have submitted their interim financials, or else the JSE takes their main debt off the listing, and then a lot of funds are going to dump it because it's no longer going to meet their requirements for holding such bonds. We are hoping that, given that the Deputy President is a former businessman, he is going to be able to handle the business side of things. But at the end of the day, we do need to restructure our debt and not follow the models that have been set out there in terms of how we should be running. At the end of the day, what we need to do is that we need to get more South Africans employed, increase our tax base, because it's our tax rands that are going to be able to pull us out. Now, with the high levels of unemployment, inequality, and all of that, you're not going to get it done. So you need to get more people working, not more corporations, because corporations are smart. I mean, the Paradise Papers, the Panama Papers have showed us the tricks they get up to ensure that they they can avoid tax as much as humanly possible. Whereas you, the individual, before your salary even hits your account, you are taxed. So the more we get people earning and off the grant system...
But we get them earning if they are skilled, if they have the requisite, characteristics that market wants. But here's an intervention on free higher education where people are shutting it down, saying it's going to destabilize the economy, we can't afford it, where we're supposed to find the money. But if you have a large base of an illiterate or semi-literate population that is dependent on social grants and the safety net that the state provides, you're not going to grow. I mean, how do you grow the economy without a population that can support that?
We have 18 million people on social welfare in this country. That number is going to grow if we don't invest in free education. What free education has taught us is that among graduates or amongst qualified people, unemployment is sitting at 5%, whereas with the rest of the population, it's sitting at about 60%. So you want to have graduates, you want to have skilled people because they are more employable, and that's how you prevent that 18 million social welfare bracket to grow. That's how you prevent that from happening. And I think whether people like it or not, free education is going to happen. We will feel the effects thereof 5 years from now for the first time, and I think that's a good thing. However, I just want to disagree with Zamo. I think restructuring our debt is a serious problem, because what debt restructuring really looks like in this instance is that the president goes and says to the people we owe money, look, guys, we know you owe you money. We don't have the money to pay you now. Give us a couple more years added onto our repayment term. When you lengthen the repayment term, you lengthen the amount of time you have to pay interest on it, and that interest accumulates. And that's what happened to Greece in 2012 to 2013. And that's how you have a country considering sovereign debt default. And that's not a path we want to go down to. So while it's difficult at the moment to service our debt, I think we need to weather the storm. And I think it's becoming cheaper to service our debt when we have a stronger currency. And I think that's a particular good thing. So if we can, moderate the currency around 12 Rand, or if America can just keep messing up like it does, and we have a currency that sticks around 12 Rand to the dollar, it becomes cheaper to service your debt. And I think that's particularly a good thing. However, if Cyril Ramaphosa is going to speak to investors about borrowing money, right, he needs to convince them that the money is going to go to things that have short-term returns, immediate returns. And land is a very quick return. It's almost immediate.
All right, and how does he explain BRICS then, and whether the current system with the IMF and our trade partners being largely Europe, in the context that there is a shift clearly, that we are now part of the BRICS bloc? How does Cyril Ramaphosa explain this to say it is benign, it actually is a good thing that we can work together as investors from the West?
Well, I'm actually not sure, because I'm sure they're wanting him to literally turn around from what President Zuma was doing during his term, which is he leaned more towards BRICS. And on the refinancing and restructuring our debt, I was thinking, given that China is sitting with a lot of money and they constantly do throw money at the Americans, they would certainly have the money to be able to allow us to restructure a significant portion of that debt. But in reality, I really don't know what the Deputy President is going to do, and I'll leave it to him, and I will judge his actions thereafter. But in terms of BRICS, BRICS is 42% of the world. And the reality of it is that the most growth has to come from within the African continent. So yes, we definitely have to educate South Africans so that they can identify opportunities, expand into Africa to get into growing markets, so that we increase the revenue that is earned by the country as a whole. And in that way, eventually, somewhere down the line, we will end up on that upside. And then we need to begin taking advantage of our competitive things. We have got the platinum resources. Why are we not beneficiating our minerals? We know that in 80 years' time or so, we will no longer have the minerals. So constantly shipping them out raw to buy finished products is not helping us. So in our strategies, we need to start looking at beneficiation very aggressively. I know that the bill has been sitting, I think, since 2009 on the president's desk. It's 2018. Nothing has been done. Now, if you look at the number of jobs that could have been created just by beneficiating up to 30%, it's a lot.
That's the thing. It's about implementation, and I hear you on that part. But, I mean, the WEF, or World Economic Forum, at least the theme for today's discussion was building a peace in Africa. And we know that some of the economic terrorism or terroristic acts also come from the interest that of minerals that certain countries would want to possess over others. There's huge contestation in that space. How do you build peace in Africa when we know that some of the wars are actually funded by foreign nationals?
I think Nigeria is a good example. When Boko Haram captured oil fields in the northeast of Nigeria, they strongholded that economy for a very long time in that region. The country is still struggling to make money back from those oil fields that were captured because a lot of those things. Well, firstly, there are no functioning oil refineries in Nigeria at the moment, and a large part of that is ill governance, but also terrorism that threatens that.
But who's funding exactly that? And this is the space I think that Davos needs to explore, because if you look at DR Congo, if you look at Angola, where there's instability, generally it has to do with the mineral or the minerals that country possesses.
Yes, no, certainly. And I mean, if Boko Haram certainly is an organization that has been losing power. It's no longer as aggressive as it was. Where the funding comes from, I'm unsure. I wish I was a terrorist specialist to know that sort of thing. But that information is highly speculative, just given how clandestine terrorist groups really behave when it comes to money. ISIS, for instance, captured cities in Iraq and Syria, oil fields with up to that gave them a revenue of $2 billion per month during that 2014 period, excuse me. So you have Al-Shabaab did a similar thing in Kenya. When you speak about peace, stability in Africa, you have to speak about not just terrorism, but general criminality. You see crime organizations grow out of the desperation of inequality across Africa. South Africa is certainly an example thereof, where drug trafficking is something that only grows insofar as it has people to feed off of, selling them the hopes and dreams of you being able to feed your family if you push these drugs. And unfortunately, inequality and unemployment, specifically youth unemployment, sitting at above 60%, is so high in South Africa that young people are likely to go into criminality, posing a threat of security to the state. And that is the danger that they need to discuss over there. Not just terrorism, but the crime that comes as a result of inequality.
Yeah, but not just rhetoric, talk shop, superficially, how to build peace in Africa. We know that there had been bilateral agreements and all sorts of other promises. But in localizing it, what it means as we kick off the year, and our viewers holding on to that aspiration that things will change, there will be wage parity, or there will be, the narrowing of the gap between rich and poor. There will be some level of all enjoying the prosperity, an egalitarian society, or am I a dreamer?
Well, I don't know if that's going to happen in our lifetime, because the reality is, I mean, the ANC government has been in power for the last 24 years. Yes, it has managed to increase or better the lot of black people in general. But if you took away the social net that the grants provide, black people would be worse off, if you look at it in reality. So no, there hasn't been any magic that has happened over the last 24 years, because the system ultimately remained the same. If you look at legislation, I know former Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe came out with the report sometime last year in terms of our laws and that. There are still some apartheid acts that we are still using till today. I mean, I think the Medicine Controls Act is from 1965 or something like that. So there hasn't been this wholesale change that has happened. There hasn't been a wholesale change of hearts. You still have business that sits with reserves of 1.4 trillion, and they're saying they will not reinvest in this country because they're not secured profits. But these are the same businesses that did business with the apartheid state and all of that. So when it comes to it, it's not about the conscience. We may want it to be about the conscience, but at the end of the day, it's pure economies. We have found that there are certain companies that have been found reported in Paradise Papers that, they've kept money offshore because they did not want to repatriate the money into the country because they don't want to pay tax. They repatriate the monies to Mauritius, the Seychelles, and there they don't have to pay tax. And some of those companies, to be really honest, attached to the deputy president. And that is the sweet and short of it. So
yeah, Zamo, you've just dampened my entire day, and I was doing okay until you said that. But nonetheless, I much appreciated, of course, reflecting on the delegation that is representing South Africa in Davos at the World Economic Forum, with President or Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that they will put their best foot forward to sell South Africa as an investment destination of choice. We'll leave it there for now. We'll be back after this.